Okay, we're going to talk about minimizing your risk when it comes to flood maps. Okay, understanding where your property is situated, identifying if it's in a flood zone. This is something that's important, something that gets missed, and I can't rave on enough about this because we do a lot of checks here. We don't just look at flood zones, we look at a whole bunch of other zones that it's where the property is situated. Why? Because we may make sure that we get the best property in the best location. There's a whole bunch of things, school catchment zones. We're looking at bushfire zones and flight paths and etc. So the list goes on. Now, I want to talk about flood zones because, we invest a lot in Queensland. We do a lot in Queensland. We do a lot in other states and territories as well. But when it comes to Queensland, people's got a negative connotation about, oh, Jesus Christ, Queensland always has natural disasters and there's always floods there. Now, don't run away from a region if it's been flooded before. That's one thing I want to put out there because I've bought property in places where it's been flooded before, and hypothetically I bought one in Ipswich. Place has been flooded before. That suburb has been flooded. My property had no effect at all. It's not in a flood zone. So don't run away from it because you will actually cost yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars because some of those locations can be really great locations to invest in. You just got to understand where the property is situated. So how do you find out where your property is in the suburb and if it's in a flood zone? Great question. Now, if you've got a solicitor or a conveyancer, they've got an interactive mapping tool that can do these checks for you. Okay? They can go on there, jump on and check out if it's in a flood zone. Or you can go on the council that you're looking to invest in. If you're in a region and there's a council there, go on into that council. They should have a flood mapping tool. We use a lot of their tools. And we check a lot of their other things that they've got on that program that we can look at to make a good informed decision. Go in there and check out if the property's in a flood map zone. You guys got to put in the address. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It is a bit tricky at the beginning. You can always ask for help from those local councils, regions that will help you out. But don't run away from these locations because it's been flooded before. 9 times out of 10 you hear all these things on the news. It's been flooded before. And they talk about the whole town's been flooded. And it's only a small portion of the suburb. Okay, so it happens a lot. It does happen a lot, but just make sure your property is not in that flood zone. There's things you can look at for contours. And contours is the elevation of the level of the ground. So, of course, depending on where the property is in the part of that suburb, there's going to be some peaks and troughs of, land of elevation. So if the property is in a more of a higher elevation landscape compared to some other properties that are closer to that flood zone, you're going to see that they're going to be out of risk because of the elevation of land. So they'll be a higher above sea level or river level. That's something to look out for as well because you just don't want to you want to minimize risk and you want to look at other things because you don't want to be investing in a property that's 1 or 2 streets away maybe from a flood zone, depending on the contours as well. So if that property there is 1 or 2 streets away from the flood zone, but it's on an elevated contour and it's elevated by a certain percentage, there is a possibility you're going to be out of risk completely and your property is not, it's not going to affect you. But that's something that comes with identifying and those locations and understanding the elevation mapping. So I don't want to rave on too much about that, but that's something that's important too. So just make sure you do your checks, make sure you're out of that flood zone. Now, a lot of people come to us. Some of my clients have actually come and they've done some research themselves and they might go on realestate.com and they might find a property in that region that we're looking to invest. And they come to me and they go, Frank, look, I found this property. It's $100,000 cheaper than what you presented this other property to me with. And, how come you didn't pick this up? And I go, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect or client, look, this is the property. This property here is in a flood zone. I'll interactive mapping tool. I'll take a snippet. I'll send it to them. I'll even give them a breakdown report. And then they'll be like, okay, that makes sense. Now, normally when those properties are in a flood zone, they're going to be a lot cheaper than your typical investments in that location. And why you find they're a lot cheaper is the insurance policies. Now, this is something that you should be checking, insurance policies on your property or investment property that you're about to purchase, because it might be out of a flood mapping zone, but your insurance policy might be through the roof. and why. It could be in a cyclone zone, it could be in a bushfire zone. These are something to look out for as well. So there's always more checks you have to do. The more checks you do, the more risk you're gonna minimize. So make sure if you do a check on a property, it's on a flood zone or a bushfire zone or a cyclone zone. Get an insurance policy done on that property. So just go on maybe, Amy or whatever it may be, enter in the details of the property and see how much insurance is going to cost you. We don't want to invest in a location. Insurance is over $2,000 per annum, and it's taking out your cash flow. So that's something to take in consideration. Make sure you do your checks, okay? And that's, you're going to minimize the risk. Now I want to kind of touch on and show you something here. This is Brisbane flood mapping tool. And this is what I got from the mapping. Now, as you can see, we hear a lot of bad things about Brisbane. It's been flooded already in right now as we speak. But as you can see, not the whole city's been flooded. So you're going to see there's pockets here. As you can see where Park Street is, it hasn't been flooded before at all, and it's probably never going to get flooded. And reason being, it's probably got high elevation here compared to where these properties are here down in the valley, closer to that river. Now, if you look at this train line, now some of it's been caught up in that flood zone, but 9 times out of 10, they're out of they're in a safe haven zone, because why? When they did do the rails, even though it would have been a long time ago, they always make sure they do those further checks, being that something involved with government spending a lot of money. So don't buy property on the rail line, of course, but as you can see that this area here is quite safe from the flood zones. The more further away from those flood zones you are, the more safer your property is. I wouldn't go buy a property a block or two away from a flood zone unless the contours tell me a different story. So that's something that's further investigation of understanding the level of land and making sure this land is on a upwards trajectory, showing you that there's for it to get flooded, there has to be a significant flood. But I don't put myself at risk at all. I wouldn't either if I was you. Make sure your property is always out of all of those risky locations, okay? Don't get scared around this. People get scared around this and say, oh, geez, I found the property here and it's pretty far away from the flood zone, okay? And that, by using a buyer's agent like ourselves, we're doing further checks. We're looking at contours, we're looking at elevation, we're looking at a whole bunch of other risk mitigation tactics that we use here, so we can make an informed decision. Sewage lines, okay, that's something to look out for as well, that you can use on an interactive mapping tool that we do here. That goes even further to make sure there's great sewage around the properties that can help with this minimizing or reducing the water around the properties. So something to keep in your mind out. This is super important. Make sure you do DDs. Make sure you do your insurance checks as well. That's something I can't rave on enough about. So make sure you do your checks, and you will be safe and you'll be out of risk. As a property investor, we don't want to be a risky investor. We want to take a risk, of course, and take a punt and invest in property, but of course it's calculated risk, which is the most important thing. So thank you for watching this video. If you like it, subscribe, share. The more likes we get, of course, the more the more publicity we get through these videos, and it's just to help you guys become a better informed investor.